Is self-defense a reasonable thing? That's what we're going to discuss this morning on the 5-minute summation. Good morning and welcome aboard. Um, I have written a blog post again about the idea of self-defense, and there are a couple of particular things with regard to that. But let me kind of go in order here and kind of discuss what I see I need to talk about where this is concerned. I'm going to start with the idea that something I harp on periodically, you're going to find, is that I'm a Christian. And as a Christian, it's hard for me to make a case for the idea that self-defense is a reasonable thing. Well, the reason for that is pretty simple. It's that if you kill somebody who's not a Christian, then you've taken the possibility that they could be saved at some point from that individual. And if they're a Christian, they're a brother or sister in Christ, and the idea of taking their life is a not a great idea. Now, the idea of protecting others, is one that's a whole lot more reasonable even from a Christian perspective, because the same thing applies to them as applies to any attacker or evildoer, right? They equally may or may not be Christians. They may have slid away from their belief. They, whatever. Something may have happened that might make it so that they are not believers. And likewise, if they're Christian brothers and sisters, I think it's a reasonable thing to say that it's okay to protect them as well. You could argue it's a little less of a concern because the assumption is that they're going to heaven when they leave the planet. So the point is, though, that if you're a person who's standing between people who are at risk of some sort of harm and people who are going to harm them, it's actually reasonable to defend those people. And in the process, because you're the one standing between them, it's sort of reasonable then also for you to defend yourself so that they can't take action after you're no longer around where those people are concerned. So that's a really important consideration as far as I'm concerned, as far as I, see it. Okay. Now we're going to get into a little bit of a different subject, and I'm going to tell you that this is the result of a case recently where a police officer was fleeing a man who had a weapon, realized that he couldn't get away, and shot that man and killed him in what most would term self-defense. So he literally wasn't even going after the guy. He came to deal with the guy because something was called in, hey, we've got an issue where there's this domestic disturbance or whatever. But he wasn't going after the guy. He was just coming to investigate this thing that had been told to police was happening. So the question is it reasonable for this man to have defended himself? And even if I can't use the argument that he had a right to defend himself, and by the way, I think I pretty well can, because it's a general thing for him to be protecting other people, but in specific instances, he has the right to defend himself, because if he doesn't, this guy with a weapon could easily turn that weapon on other people after taking care of him, right? So that's a real problem, right? And I think pretty much anybody looking at that has to come to the conclusion that if there's anything reasonable to policing at all, we have to assume that it's reasonable for police. Frankly, it's reasonable for police to do things like shoot people when they reach for weapons in their car after they've been told not to do it, shaken off officers and been tased and jumped up from the tasing and walked away from it. I think it's, even in that sort of situation, it's pretty reasonable for a police officer to shoot somebody when they can't know, hey, there's a gun in this car or whatever. I think it's pretty reasonable for them to take action. Okay, so the summation of this all is self-defense reasonable? For me, maybe it's a little bit questionable. As soon as there is a potential for others to be involved, the questionability begins to fall away. For law enforcement authorities, I think you almost can make the case that just initially there's a good reason for them to act in self-defense. And by the way, if they act in self-defense for no other reason, they should be looking for the well-being of the people around who might be harmed if they're not there. Okay, I'm pretty much out of time, and I'm going to go ahead and do the shameless plug. I have a blog. It's at blogs.kpschubert.com. I am on Twitter and Parler at kpschubert. That's at kpschubert. I have a Facebook page, Kurt's Religion and Politics page. And I am on Patreon as Kurt's Religion and Politics if you should decide that you want to support what I'm doing. Thank you very much for watching, and have a great day.